You ever notice how the moment you start explaining yourself, you somehow lose all the power you had a second ago? It's strange. Someone questions your decision, your tone, your silence, and suddenly, you feel this reflex to justify, to prove you had a reason. But that's the exact moment you hand over control, because the person demanding an explanation has already positioned themselves above you. You're reacting. They're dictating the terms of the conversation. And Machiavelli would say that's the beginning of your downfall. He understood something most people still don't. Power doesn't require explanation. In fact, the very act of explaining weakens authority. Because authority isn't built on logic, it's built on perception. The second you try to defend your choices, you admit they can be debated. You admit that your position is not self-evident, that your decisions can be challenged. And once people sense that, they stop seeing you as someone who must be obeyed and start seeing you as someone who can be persuaded. When you stop justifying yourself, you create silence, and silence unnerves people. It leaves space for their imagination, and their imagination always paints you stronger than any argument could. The human mind hates uncertainty, but the powerful live inside it. They make others scramble for meaning, while they remain still, calm, unreadable. That's why Machiavelli believed that the strongest leaders spoke the least when accused, questioned, or provoked. Because the moment you start defending yourself, you give your enemy a foothold, a place to attack again. Think of every confrontation you've ever had. The times you said, "I didn't mean it like that," or "You have to understand my intention was good." What happened next? Did they respect you more, or did they sense they could get more out of you, more apologies, more adjustments, more weakness disguised as reason? Justifications are like open doors. Once you open one, people keep walking through. They don't stop until you've surrendered every ounce of power just to prove you're not the bad guy. But here's the truth, Machiavelli would whisper. Being misunderstood is a weapon if you know how to use it. When people don't know exactly where you stand, they hesitate. They calculate. They fear making the wrong move against you. That fear is the soil where respect grows. Because respect isn't built from people liking you. It's built from them knowing they can't control you. And you know who people can't control? Those who don't explain. The next time someone demands an explanation, watch what happens when you give none. They'll lean forward, fill the silence, try to decode your expression, read your tone, interpret your silence as meaning. They'll expose their own insecurities trying to understand you, and you, by saying nothing, control the entire dynamic. It's a law of psychological gravity. The one who explains is the one who kneels. Even if you have a good reason, even if your motives are pure, don't waste them in speech. Let your results be your justification. Let outcomes speak where words would fail. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must always seem decisive, certain, above the noise of opinion. Because the crowd doesn't respect explanations, they respect dominance. You might think silence makes you cold, arrogant, or misunderstood, but those are the exact traits that build mystique. The people who explain every move, every choice, every thought, they're transparent, predictable, replaceable. But the one who keeps people guessing becomes untouchable. The world follows those it can't fully read. When you justify, you're saying, "Your perception of me matters more than my truth." When you stop justifying, you're saying, "Believe what you want. I'll still win." That is power. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said appearances must be managed, not defended. Defending implies vulnerability. Managing implies control. But why do we feel so compelled to explain ourselves in the first place? Because we crave validation. Because silence feels like rejection. Because when someone questions us, we fear losing their approval. Yet Machiavelli knew approval is the weakest currency of all. It buys you nothing but dependence. The more you seek it, the less you're worth. True influence comes when people must adapt to you, not when you keep explaining yourself to adapt to them. It's not that you should never speak. It's that your words must be deliberate, not defensive. There's a difference between clarifying and justifying. Clarifying serves your purpose. Justifying serves theirs. Clarifying says, "Here's the direction." Justifying says, "Please understand me." And the latter, whether you realize it or not, turns authority into negotiation. Machiavelli would tell you, stop trying to be understood by everyone. The powerful aren't understood, they're interpreted. Their silence becomes legend, their choices mysterious, their presence untouchable. You lose that the moment you start defending your image. Imagine two people leading a room. One reacts to every criticism, "That's not what I meant. Here's why I did that. I hope this clears the air." The other simply listens, nods once, and says, "We're done here." Who do you think people fear disappointing? Who do they believe holds real power? The one who explains or the one who decides? Every explanation creates a thread, and the more threads you spin, the easier it becomes for people to pull you apart. This is why Machiavelli's rule of unquestionable authority begins not with aggression, but with restraint. Power isn't proven by how loudly you speak, but by how calmly you can stay silent while others lose their composure. And silence isn't emptiness, it's strategy. The mind that doesn't rush to explain has already mastered itself. Most people can't handle being misunderstood for more than a few seconds. Their ego screams for correction. But Machiavellian strength is about enduring that discomfort. To let people project, assume, and talk, while you remain focused on the result. Because in the end, what breaks your enemies isn't your explanation, it's their own misunderstanding. You let them misjudge you long enough to make mistakes, and then you strike with proof, not words. By then, your silence has already made you inevitable. The greatest form of power is quiet certainty. It doesn't need to prove, it simply is. And the longer you stay in that state, the more others begin to orbit around it, seeking approval, clarity, meaning. They hand you power willingly, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing where they stand with you. That's how rulers, CEOs, and even ordinary people who understand this principle rise above the noise. They never justify their pace, their choices, or their distance. They let people wonder, and that wondering turns into respect, because humans can only dominate what they understand. And when they can't understand you, they call you powerful. Power is not in convincing others, it's in making them stop questioning you altogether. And that moment begins when you stop explaining why you deserve it. There's a strange freedom that comes when you no longer need to be understood. You stop bending your truth to fit other people's comfort. You stop trying to sound reasonable in a world that doesn't reward reason, it rewards strength. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. People aren't drawn to what's right. They're drawn to what's certain. The one who stands firm in silence appears far more capable than the one who argues endlessly for validation. Certainty is magnetic. It doesn't need to convince. It makes others adjust themselves around it. When you justify yourself, you hand away that magnetism. You start chasing balance when you were meant to create gravity. Every "let me explain" is a step down the ladder of dominance. It tells others you need their understanding to keep your identity intact. But power is built when your identity is self-sustaining, when no one's disbelief can shake it. You'll notice this everywhere once you start looking. The boss who explains every decision loses control of their team. The leader who simply says, "We're doing this," earns quiet obedience. The person who tries to defend their boundaries in relationships ends up arguing for basic respect, while the one who enforces them without words gets treated differently from that point forward. It's not because one is kinder or smarter. It's because one knows when silence speaks louder than any defense. Machiavelli would call this the rule of unquestionable authority. To rise above debate, you must train yourself to stop participating in it. That doesn't mean ignoring people. It means choosing when to engage and when to let the silence punish them. It's psychological dominance through emotional restraint. People who need to justify themselves can be provoked easily because their pride hinges on being seen correctly. But the person who has detached from that, who doesn't care if they're misunderstood, becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability, in the Machiavellian sense, is power. Most people use language as armor. They explain, they rationalize, they fill the air with reasons so they don't have to feel exposed. But when you stop doing that, when you let the tension hang in the room without flinching, something shifts. People feel it. It's like standing next to a storm that refuses to break. You command attention not by force, but by composure. It's the same principle warriors used before battle. The one who stayed silent while the other boasted created unease. The silent one was unreadable, detached, capable of anything. The talkative one had already revealed fear through excess words. Machiavelli knew that silence isn't just about what you don't say, it's about what you make others imagine in its place. And here's the twist. The world doesn't punish you for being silent, it rewards you. When you stop justifying, people start justifying you. They invent noble motives for your actions, even when you had none. They assume wisdom behind your restraint, strategy behind your stillness. Because the mind hates blank spaces, It fills them with the most flattering explanations it can find. And that's how power multiplies without effort. The paradox of authority is that you gain more control the less you appear to need it. The ruler who justifies every decree invites resistance. The one who acts with quiet finality becomes untouchable. That's because justification belongs to the realm of equality, debate, persuasion, moral approval. But power lives above those things. It doesn't ask to be liked or even agreed with. It simply acts, and the world recalibrates around it. You've seen this dynamic in smaller ways, too. Think about arguments that spiraled out of control because you tried to explain yourself too soon. You thought clarity would end conflict, but it made it worse, because your explanation gave the other person something to attack. When people sense defensiveness, they keep pressing. But when they meet stillness, when you look at them with calm eyes and say nothing, they start to shrink into the silence. They begin to feel foolish for expecting a reaction. That's why Machiavelli believed restraint is more powerful than revenge. Because words are reactive, but silence is active. It's deliberate. It sends the message, you are not significant enough to provoke me. And that, more than any argument, establishes hierarchy. The silent one always occupies the higher ground. Now, this doesn't mean you never speak. It means that when you do, it's from control, not emotion. Machiavelli warned that even a single unnecessary justification could undo months of carefully built authority. Because once you start explaining, you lose the illusion of inevitability. People start to see that you can be reached, reasoned with, maybe even manipulated. And once that happens, your aura of command fractures. To hold authority, your every word must feel intentional. Your pauses must feel earned. You have to let people sense that you could explain yourself, but you simply choose not to. That's the difference between arrogance and power. Choice. Arrogance speaks out of insecurity. Power speaks out of selectiveness. And when you finally do speak after long silence, your words hit like a hammer. Because people have been waiting, wondering, replaying your stillness in their minds. The fewer justifications you give, the more weight every sentence carries. Power grows in the space between your last word and your next. That's why Machiavelli's most cunning princes didn't justify their cruelty. They justified their victories. They understood that the people don't need to know why you acted. They only need to see that you won. The crowd forgets explanations. They remember outcomes. And once you realize that, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of defending your character. If you win, your silence becomes wisdom. If you lose, your explanations become excuses. So why speak before you've won? Why waste power on words when the result will speak louder? The art of not explaining is an act of self-preservation. It keeps your energy directed inward, focused on action, not reaction. It denies others access to your thoughts and motives. It keeps them guessing, off balance, slightly afraid. And fear, not friendship, is the foundation of real authority. People respect what they can't predict. They follow what they can't fully understand. And the moment they feel they've figured you out, they stop respecting you. That's why justification, no matter how noble, always costs you power. It turns mystery into information, and information can be used against you. Silence, on the other hand, is immunity. It protects your motives, your emotions, your limits. It lets you shape how others perceive you without ever confirming or denying their assumptions. The world calls it stoicism, coldness, pride, but Machiavelli called it necessity, because the ruler who can't endure being misunderstood will never last long enough to be obeyed. Once you learn to master that, once you stop trying to fix every false perception, you'll notice something incredible. People begin to apologize to you for misunderstanding you. They start working to regain your approval even when you've said nothing, because the silence becomes sacred. It feels like judgment, like reflection, like depth. And in that silence, you own the room without ever needing to explain how or why. That's the power Machiavelli wanted you to seize, not by dominance of words, but by dominance of self. The man or woman who no longer needs to be understood has already risen above those who argue to be heard. And eventually, you'll realize that silence is not the absence of power, it's its purest form. When you stop explaining yourself, people begin to explain you to themselves. And that's where your influence multiplies. They debate your motives, analyze your expressions, interpret your pauses as meaning. You become a mirror where they project their own fears and expectations. Machiavelli knew that this is how true authority is built, not through persuasion, but through interpretation. The fewer words you give them, the more meaning they assign to each one. The ones who explain are trying to convince. The ones who don't are defining reality. Because words exist in the realm of negotiation, but silence creates law. A law doesn't explain itself. It simply is. That's how Machiavellian power functions. It doesn't argue for legitimacy. It declares it through composure. Most people think authority is something you announce, but it's actually something you withdraw. You strip away everything unnecessary, every emotional reaction, every defensive sentence, every need to be liked, until only certainty remains. That certainty becomes presence. And presence, when consistent, becomes command. The reason this rule feels unnatural at first is because we're trained to over-explain from childhood. We're conditioned to believe that transparency equals trust, that being understood equals being safe. But Machiavelli would tell you that trust is not earned through vulnerability, it's imposed through stability. People don't trust those who reveal everything. They trust those who seem immovable. Every time you justify yourself, you chip away at that immovability. You reveal your process, your fears, your reasoning. And with each detail, people get a clearer map of how to move you. But when you stop explaining, the map disappears. All they're left with is terrain they can't predict, and in that uncertainty, they hesitate. That hesitation is your leverage. You can see this play out in every layer of life. In business, the executive who calmly says that's the direction ends discussions. The one who explains every metric invites more objections. In relationships, the person who stays composed during accusations holds the power dynamic. The one who panics to explain loses it instantly. The dynamic is universal. The less you justify, the more people adjust to your silence. Because silence, in Machiavellian terms, is not passive, it's active domination. It makes the other side fill the space, expose themselves, reveal their thinking. When you speak less, others talk more, and in their talking, they betray themselves. You're not losing control, you're collecting intelligence. And when the time comes to act, you'll act with precision because you've listened, not defended. This is how authority sustains itself. It's not about appearing perfect, it's about appearing unshakable. You can make mistakes, you can be wrong, but never look desperate to justify why. People don't remember whether you were right. They remember whether you looked sure. That's the illusion of power, and illusion is often stronger than truth. Machiavelli warned rulers against showing too much concern for reputation. Not because reputation isn't important, but because anxiety about it exposes weakness. He believed that image should be managed like warfare through misdirection, not confession. You never fight perception head-on, you let it exhaust itself. The moment you defend your name, you admit it's fragile. But when you ignore accusations, they start to dissolve. The world eventually assumes silence means superiority. And there's something poetic about that. How in a world desperate to be understood, the one who doesn't chase understanding becomes the most respected. Because people subconsciously equate calmness with control. They think, if he's not defending himself, maybe he doesn't need to. Maybe he knows something I don't. That maybe is what makes you untouchable. The silence becomes its own myth. People will start to describe you in extremes. Some will call you cold. Others will call you wise. Some will think you're arrogant. Others will think you're calculating. It doesn't matter which version they choose. What matters is that they choose, that they think of you at all, that they can't stop trying to define you. That's the game of power. Not to be understood, but to be interpreted endlessly. When you master the art of not explaining, you'll start to see how predictable others are. They'll reveal their emotional triggers in their attempts to understand you. They'll project their insecurities into your silence. They'll even apologize just to fill the void your calm creates. That's when you'll know you've crossed into authority. The moment your lack of reaction becomes their obsession. The world tries to lure you back into weakness by calling it communication. Explain yourself. Be transparent. Let's talk about it. But Machiavelli would remind you, never play by the rules of the powerless. Those rules are designed to strip away your edge, to make you predictable. True power is not democratic, it's asymmetrical. It doesn't owe anyone an explanation. The people who rule rooms, industries, even relationships, they all carry the same aura. You can feel it when they walk in. It's not charisma, it's composure. It's the quiet certainty that says, you can question me, but I won't answer. That calm defiance shakes people more than any speech ever could. So from this point on, make a promise to yourself. When someone tries to provoke you into explaining, resist. Don't let their insecurity dictate your energy. Let them drown in their assumptions while you stay unmoved. Let them talk themselves into confusion while you stay anchored. Your silence is not weakness. It's proof that you no longer play their game. And soon you'll start to feel it, how much energy you save by not explaining, how your focus sharpens when you're no longer rehearsing defenses in your mind, how your words, when finally spoken, hit harder because they're rare. This is the transformation Machiavelli wanted his followers to understand. Power is not gained by talking. It's maintained by choosing when not to. The one who doesn't justify becomes the one everyone adjusts to. The one who doesn't react becomes the one everyone reacts to. And the one who no longer explains himself seizes all the power because he's no longer asking for permission to have it.